This is utterly unacceptable, Eliana. Dr. Malcolm Whitner's voice thundered through the sterile confines of the conference room, reverberating off the clinical white walls, each syllable sharp enough to pierce the air. The sharpness of his tone made several of my colleagues flinch, their gazes quickly darting to the floor or out the window. But my gaze remained fixed on him. I was frozen, the weight of 24 pairs of eyes bearing down upon me, searing through my every thought. The quarterly staff meeting had devolved into something more grotesque, something personal. It had become my public execution, and I was the sole target of Malcolm's fury. I felt it, each word a blow, each accusation an assault on my very foundation. My name is Voss, and after 15 years of unwavering dedication to NovaMed Research Institute in Toledo, Ohio, I was being tossed aside with the coldness of an afterthought. At 54, I had invested my soul into this place, sculpting a reputation for integrity and excellence. Every protocol, every compliance check, every detail, I followed them all, meticulously, relentlessly. The National Institutes of Health Grant Committee had, however, found significant irregularities in our compliance documentation. They rescinded our funding, and now, like clockwork, it was my turn to pay. Malcolm's lips were thin, drawn tight in barely contained rage, his words sharp and clipped, as if each one was a dagger thrown with precision. $8.4 million. Gone. His fist slammed against the polished conference table with a thud that echoed through the room. I felt my throat tighten, the words I longed to speak forming, yet dying before they reached my lips. I couldn't defend myself. Not here. Not now. This wasn't about uncovering truth. It was about finding a scapegoat, a fall person. The warning signs had been there, so subtle, so easy to dismiss. But in the last 6 months, since Meditech Solutions had acquired our lab, the atmosphere had shifted. Suddenly, quantity trumped quality. Deadlines became more important than integrity, and the new recruits, the hand-picked by Meditech, seemed to operate under a different code altogether, one that disregarded the very principles that had sustained this place. Due to these compliance failures, Malcolm continued, his tone devoid of warmth or remorse, Ali Voss is no longer with the company. His words felt like a death sentence. Her office will be cleared by the end of the day without a word. The finality in his voice made my chest tighten. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of those 24 eyes on me, each one watching me like a spectator at an execution. I straightened the navy blue blazer, the same one I wore on my first day at NovaMed, a small act of defiance, a gesture to the woman I once was, before all of this. I walked out, my footsteps echoing down the hallway, each sound amplifying the silence of the room I left behind. I could feel the whispers rise like a tide behind me, but I did not look back. I couldn't. Dr. Erin Glass, one of Meditech's new star recruits, caught my eye as I passed the open lab. Her face flushed, a quick flicker of discomfort before she averted her gaze. It was all too obvious. She knew. And in that brief, unconscious moment, she confirmed what I had suspected for weeks, the things I had quietly documented, the deviations they assumed I'd never notice, the falsifications hidden behind corporate agendas. I had always prided myself on my attention to detail. That was why I had kept my own records separate from the official systems. Call it paranoia, or call it wisdom built from experience, but I had trusted my instincts. And now, those meticulous, private notes were no longer a burden. They were ammunition. I had witnessed the fall of many researchers over the years. Some were undone by the pressure of publication deadlines. Others, more insidious, had been swayed by the allure of results that didn't quite align with the truth. They had cut corners, compromised standards, but I had always remained steadfast. The constant in a world of change. The keeper of integrity. I began at Novamed when it was still a small, independent research facility specializing in autoimmune disorders. Back then, we celebrated each discovery with joy, with the kind of excitement that could only come from knowing we were making a difference. Our founder, Dr. Elaine Novak, had taught us that good science took time. It couldn't be rushed. Patience produces precision, she'd often say, adjusting her spectacles as she reviewed our findings. When Dr. Novak retired 5 years ago, the winds began to shift. The focus was no longer on science, but on securing grants, patents, and profits. And when Meditech Solutions merged with us, the soul of the place, our very identity, began to erode. I cleared my desk now, methodically. 15 years of dedication, encapsulated in cardboard, old photographs of lab teams, awards for excellence, personal letters from colleagues who had come and gone. Among the remnants of my career was a handwritten note from Dr. Novak herself. Thank you for your unwavering dedication to the truth. It was a cruel irony. The truth was the one thing I had always stood by, and now it was the very thing that had led me to this point. Aliana, do you need any help? Thomas Reynolds, a young technician I had trained 3 years ago, stood at my office door, his expression a cocktail of concern and discomfort. I shook my head, offering him a smile, reassuring but hollow. Thank you, Thomas, but I'm almost finished, I replied, my voice steady. Just make sure you keep detailed records of everything, especially when it involves the chemical storage logs. His eyes widened just slightly, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. He knew. Is that what this is about? The chemical logs? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Among other things, I replied, locking eyes with him. Just protect yourself, Thomas, and remember what I taught you about protocol documentation. Once he left, I turned back to my desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. There, hidden from prying eyes, was a plain black notebook. My ledger. Inside were dates, times, and observations. Each one a meticulous record of discrepancies and anomalies I had noticed since the merger. Most of them pointed to Dr. Glass's accelerated trials, to the strange amendments to chemical storage documentation. It was time to make those records count. I slipped the notebook into my bag, the black leather strap biting into my fingers. One last look around the office. My professional home for over 15 years, now reduced to a hollow shell. The potted aloe plant by the window, once a symbol of the quiet growth I had nurtured here, sat lifeless in its corner. The periodic table poster, with my handwritten notes in the margins, a quiet rebellion against the clinical world we had come to live in. And the view, the parking lot, where I had watched the seasons change, the ebb and flow of time marked by late nights and early mornings, the rhythm of my life. At the door, I paused, my hand on the light switch. A final glance over my shoulder, and I whispered a quiet goodbye to the place that had once defined so much of who I was, or who I had been. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the soft hum of the fridge filling the silence. Before me lay the contents of my personal ledger, spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Pages of meticulous notes, printed screenshots, and dated emails. Each piece was a fragment of a larger story, one I had witnessed unraveling from within the walls of Novamed. I reviewed it all with the same detached precision I had always employed in my work. The timeline began to emerge, a clean and methodical charting of when everything had started to fall apart. It had begun 3 months ago, when Dr. Glass initiated a new trial protocol for an experimental arthritis treatment. The procedure was standard, or should have been. Certain chemicals required specialized containment, and the quantities used had to be carefully regulated over specific periods of time. But the official logs painted a different picture. The intervals between usage were impossible, too short, a blatant violation of safety protocols. I had questioned it. My inquiry was met with Malcolm's cold dismissal. "Dr. Glass has approval for an accelerated timeline," he had told me, as though that was supposed to explain everything. No further details, no justification, just silence. Then, the missing data points, those suspicious gaps in our trial results. Gaps that were later conveniently filled with numbers that looked too perfect, too clean. I raised concerns about the statistical anomalies, but I was reminded, firmly, that Meditech had different analytical standards. I was told to focus on operations, not analysis. But it didn't end there. The final piece fell into place when I accessed the security logs. 3 separate occasions. Times when my credentials had been used to approve documentation changes while I was not even in the building. Someone had used my access to validate modifications to critical compliance documents, documents that were now being used as the foundation to blame me for the grant loss. My hands trembled as the weight of it all hit me. 15 years. 15 years of maintaining an unblemished record. 15 years of training and mentoring young scientists in proper laboratory procedures. I had been the cornerstone of Novamed's reputation for excellence, and now they had discarded me without a second thought. My phone buzzed, a text message from Thomas. "Everyone's in shock. They're already interviewing replacements for you. Glass seems nervous." Good, I thought. She should be nervous. I exhaled slowly, pushing the anger down. It wasn't about that anymore. I wasn't doing this for revenge. It was about the truth. It was about making sure the integrity of science wasn't lost in the face of corporate greed. I opened my laptop and began organizing the evidence with methodical precision. A letter to the Institutional Ethics Board, detailing the falsified data, naming the individuals responsible. A report for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, complete with time-stamped screenshots that proved the chemical storage violations. As I worked, the storm of emotion inside me began to settle. This was about exposing the corruption, not about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that science remained grounded in truth, not in the pursuit of profit. By midnight, both documents were complete, ready to be sent. The weight on my shoulders lightened as I reviewed them one last time. This was it. The next morning, I dressed carefully, methodically, sliding my arms into the sleeves of my navy blue blazer. The same blazer I had worn on my first day at Novamed, and again on what they thought was my last. One final duty to perform. I stood before the kitchen window, the morning light filtering through the blinds. I reviewed the documents one last time. Each allegation was backed by irrefutable evidence. Each claim was verifiable. I had been meticulous. It was who I was, after all. I sent both emails, first to the ethics board, then to OSHA. The rush of relief was immediate, profound. Whatever came next, the truth was out. My phone rang almost instantly. Novamed. I let it go to voicemail. Another call. Malcolm's personal number. I silenced it without a second thought. I didn't need to hear their excuses or threats. The evidence would speak for itself. I stood up, gathering my things. In my bag, I placed a sealed envelope, printed copies of everything I had sent electronically. Then I drove to the laboratory one last time. The receptionist looked startled when she saw me. "Ms. Voss? I thought, I'm just dropping something off, Diane," I said, my voice calm, my smile unwavering as I handed her the envelope. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering between me and the envelope, before she took it from my hand. I turned and walked out, the sound of my heels on the floor steady and resolute. This was just the beginning. Please ensure this reaches the board of directors. It's important. My voice was steady as I handed the sealed envelope to the receptionist. As I turned to leave, the sound of hurried footsteps behind me made me pause. I turned, my eyes meeting Dr. Glass's frantic gaze. Her face was drawn, tight with concern, her breath quick as she closed the distance between us. "Eliana, wait!" she called out, her voice carrying an urgency I hadn't expected. I paused, my shoulders squared, allowing her to catch up. Up close, I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the dark circles beneath them, the strain etched deeply into her features. She looked haunted. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. I stood still for a moment, my gaze unwavering. "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Dr. Glass," I replied evenly, every word calculated. Her face faltered, but she pressed on. "Please," she insisted, her eyes darting nervously toward Malcolm's office. "What happened yesterday? It wasn't right." I raised an eyebrow, watching her carefully. "I tried to speak up," she stammered. But you chose to remain silent." She trailed off, looking for words that never came. I finished for her, my voice cutting through the tension with chilling clarity. "Just as you chose to falsify those chemical storage logs." Her face paled, and she took a small step back, the weight of my words settling between us like a looming storm. I leaned in slightly, my voice professional, cold. "Just as you chose to use my credentials to approve documentation changes when I wasn't even in the building." She swallowed hard, her expression a mix of shock and guilt. But I wasn't done. 15 years, Dr. Glass. 15 years of watching people come and go. 15 years of knowing every system, every protocol, every audit trail in this laboratory, I said, my voice controlled, almost clinical. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked around, her nervous energy palpable, as if she expected someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. "It was Malcolm," she whispered, lowering her voice further, as though confessing something terrible. "He said we needed those results. Fast-tracked for the quarterly report to Meditech. He said you were being difficult, slowing everything down with unnecessary checks." I nodded slowly, the calmness in my posture betraying the storm I was suppressing inside. "Those unnecessary checks are what keep our research valid and our labs safe," I said, each word a reminder of the standards we once upheld. "But it doesn't matter now," I continued, my gaze hardening. "The truth is already on its way to those who need to see it." Her face drained of color, and for a moment, she looked as though she might crumble under the weight of the revelation. "What have you done?" she whispered. I met her gaze, unwavering. "My job," I answered simply, my voice cutting through the tension. "The one I've always done, whether anyone appreciated it or not." I turned away from her, my steps measured and resolute as I walked out of Nova Med for the final time. My head was high, my shoulders back. By noon, my phone buzzed constantly with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. By 2 o'clock, local news outlets were reporting that OSHA investigators had arrived at Nova Med for an unscheduled comprehensive inspection. At 4, an email popped up from a name I hadn't heard in years. Dr. Elaine Novak. "Eliana, I've been contacted by the ethics board regarding your report. I always knew you were the moral compass of my laboratory. Would you be willing to meet and discuss this further? There may be more that needs to be brought to light." I leaned back in my chair, a small smile forming despite myself. Dr. Novak had been retired for years, but her name still carried weight in the scientific community. If she was getting involved, this was about to become much bigger than anything Malcolm or Meditech had anticipated. 2 days later, I sat across from Dr. Elaine Novak in her modest home in the historic district of Toledo. At 78, she still possessed the sharp, analytical mind that had built Novamed from the ground up. Her living room was lined with books and academic journals, framed family photos scattered amidst framed scientific awards. "They've suspended all research activities, pending investigation," she said, pouring tea into delicate cups. "OSHA found exactly what you said they would. Critical violations in chemical storage and handling. The Ethics Board is conducting their own inquiry into the data falsification." I nodded, warming my hands on the cup she'd placed before me. "Dr. Glass is on administrative leave. She's cooperating with investigators." Dr. Novak studied me carefully, her eyes searching for something unspoken. "But there's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't included in your reports?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain the gravity of what I'd uncovered. But Dr. Novak had always been perceptive. She knew. "The grant wasn't rescinded because of compliance issues," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "At least, not the ones they blamed me for." Dr. Novak's eyebrows rose, a flicker of curiosity sparking in her gaze. "Go on." 3 weeks ago," I continued, pulling a folder from my bag, "I discovered discrepancies in the preliminary trial data Dr. Glass submitted for the NIH grant. The patient improvement rates were statistically improbable, too consistent, too perfect. When I checked the raw data against what was reported, I found alterations." I slid the folder across the coffee table, watching as Dr. Novak's expression shifted, growing graver with each passing second. "The NIH didn't reject our grant because of administrative compliance issues," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of the revelation. "They rejected it because someone on their review committee spotted the same statistical anomalies I did." Dr. Novak opened the folder slowly, her face pale as she reviewed the documents inside. "And Malcolm knew this," she said softly, her words like a dagger to the heart. "He had to." I nodded, feeling the truth settle over us like a thick fog. "I sent him a detailed analysis 2 days before the grant was officially declined." I took a sip of tea, the warmth of the liquid a stark contrast to the cold rush of realization that hit me as the rejection came through. "He needed a scapegoat that wasn't Dr. Glass," Dr. Novak said, her voice steady, almost matter-of-fact. "She was his star researcher, his direct link to Meditech's approval. So, he sacrificed you." The words stung, but not as much as I expected. After 15 years of exemplary service, to be discarded like this, it was corporate science at its finest, or perhaps its worst. "Quite different from how we used to do things," I replied, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "Indeed, Dr. Novak closed the folder with a sharp snap, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that both grounded and unsettled me. "Aliana," she began, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm assembling an independent review committee. Several colleagues from my days at the university have agreed to help with your documentation and testimony. We can ensure that appropriate action is taken." Just as she finished speaking, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen, surprised to see an email from the National Institutes of Health Office of Research Integrity. I scanned the message quickly. "They're requesting a formal interview regarding the grant application and subsequent events at Novamed," I said, my heart racing. Dr. Novak nodded sagely, a quiet satisfaction in her expression. "The dominoes are falling," she said. "Once one oversight body gets involved, others typically follow." She leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Aliana, I want you to know something. What you've done, standing up for scientific integrity at great personal cost, is the very essence of what Novamed was founded upon. I'm deeply sorry that the institution I built failed you so profoundly." Her words caught me off guard. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt tears threaten to spill. I fought them back, swallowing the emotion that had been building ever since this all started. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "That means a great deal coming from you." I left Dr. Novak's house feeling a quiet sense of resolution. For the first time in months, the weight of my actions felt right. But as I drove home, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what I might hear next. "Ms. Voss?" came the voice on the other end.
This is William Harrington from the University of Michigan Medical Research Division. Dr. Novak suggested I call you. We're looking for someone with your expertise to oversee laboratory compliance and ethics training for our staff. Would you be interested in discussing the position? A rush of vindication flooded through me. This wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing anymore. It was about finding my place in the scientific community again, a place where my values would be respected. The interview at the University of Michigan went remarkably well. As I discussed my experience and philosophy regarding laboratory ethics, I could see the respect in the committee members' eyes. They weren't looking at me as a whistleblower or a troublemaker. They saw a professional with unwavering standards, someone who had the courage to uphold them no matter the cost. "Your recommendation from Dr. Novak carries significant weight," Dr. Harrington said as he walked me out. "Your handling of the NovaMed situation demonstrates exactly the kind of ethical leadership we need." I left with a formal job offer in hand, Director of Research Integrity and Compliance Training. The position would allow me to develop protocols and train researchers across multiple departments, ensuring that scientific ethics remained paramount throughout the university's research programs. Meanwhile, the situation at NovaMed continued to spiral. Local news outlets reported that OSHA had issued citations for 27 violations, including several classified as serious. The resulting fines exceeded $300,000, but the damage to NovaMed's reputation was far more costly. Dr. Glass had apparently broken under questioning. She admitted to falsifying data at Malcolm's direction. She provided investigators with emails and recorded conversations that corroborated my evidence, extending the trail of deception further up the corporate ladder, all the way to Meditech's executives. 1 week after my visit to Dr. Novak, I received a call from an unexpected source. The board chairman of NovaMed, Harold Winthrop. His voice was grave, laced with an air of formality that seemed to weigh each word. "Ms. Voss, this is Harold Winthrop," he said. "I wonder if you might be willing to meet with the board. We are conducting an internal investigation, parallel to the regulatory inquiries, and your insights would be invaluable." My first instinct was to refuse. They had allowed me to be publicly humiliated, dismissed without due process. But then I paused, my mind racing through the possibilities. I considered Dr. Novak's words about standing up for what was right, even when it cost you everything. Maybe this was my moment to bring everything full circle. "Let me think about it," I said, my voice measured, controlled. I wasn't ready to give them the satisfaction of an immediate answer. As I ended the call, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. This was no longer about salvaging my reputation. It was about ensuring that the truth came out, no matter how high it had to reach. Dr. Novak's efforts to salvage the institution she had built were unwavering, but the damage had already been done. "I'll meet with you," I agreed, my voice calm, though the storm inside me was far from settled. But only with my legal representative present. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the boardroom where, just weeks earlier, I had been publicly dismissed. The power dynamics had shifted entirely. The board members, once so confident, now looked tired, their faces drawn with worry. Malcolm's chair sat conspicuously empty. "Where is Dr. Whitner?" I asked, my voice steady, but laced with a touch of curiosity. Harold Winthrop cleared his throat, the tension thick in the room. Dr. Whitner has been terminated, effective immediately. We've also severed several key relationships with Meditech Solutions and are in the process of restructuring our leadership. I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression despite the quiet satisfaction stirring within me.
They needed me more than I needed them.
Ms. Voss,
Winthrop continued, his tone softer, almost apologetic.
we owe you a profound apology. The events that led to your dismissal were not only unjust, but potentially criminal. The board has authorized me to offer you full reinstatement with a substantial compensation package for damages to your reputation and career. My attorney and I exchanged glances. We had anticipated this, but I wasn't here for a payout. I met their gaze, calm but firm. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I've accepted a position elsewhere. However, I would be willing to consult during your transition period to help restore proper protocols and procedures. The relief on their faces was palpable. They needed someone who understood the systems, someone who could help rebuild the laboratory's shattered credibility. We negotiated terms that included a public apology and retraction of all allegations against me. As we left the meeting, my attorney smiled, his voice low. That went even better than expected. Desperate, I replied, the corner of my mouth twitching with amusement. The NIH has suspended all their current grants pending review. Without proper certification and compliance, they'll lose everything. That evening, a text message from Thomas popped up on my phone. They announced everything at an all-staff meeting today. Malcolm's gone, Glass is gone, and they said you were right all along. Several people applauded. Wish you could have seen it. I smiled at the message, but didn't reply immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting a comprehensive transition plan for NovaMed, my final contribution to the laboratory I had served faithfully for 15 years. Sometimes I reflected that the most powerful form of redemption isn't about getting even. It's about helping rebuild what was broken, but on better foundations. The congressional hearing wasn't something I had anticipated when I first sent those emails to the ethics board and OSHA. Yet here I was, 6 months later, seated before the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, preparing to testify about research integrity in privately funded laboratories. Malcolm and 3 Meditech executives sat at a separate table, their faces grim. They had already faced federal charges for fraud related to grant applications. Now, they were about to face public scrutiny for the culture of deception they had fostered. Ms. Voss, began Congresswoman Diaz, leading the questioning. Could you describe the events that led to your identification of these compliance violations? For the next hour, I detailed everything: the pressure to produce results after Meditech's acquisition, the systematic dismantling of safety protocols, the falsification of data, and the attempt to use me as a scapegoat when the deception was discovered. Another committee member asked, "And in your professional opinion, how prevalent are these practices in the industry?" More common than we'd like to admit, I answered honestly. The pressure to secure funding and produce marketable results can override scientific integrity. That's why we need stronger whistleblower protections and more rigorous oversight. My testimony was broadcast on national news. Clips of my calm, detailed explanations contrasted sharply with Malcolm's defensive responses and the Meditech executives' evasions. Public opinion quickly solidified in favor of increased regulation for private research facilities. When I stepped down from the witness stand, Dr. Novak was waiting for me. She squeezed my hand, her voice soft, but full of pride. "You've done more than expose one lab's wrongdoing. You've sparked a national conversation about scientific ethics." As we exited the hearing room, reporters clamored for comments. I caught sight of Malcolm watching me from across the hallway. His expression was a mixture of anger and defeat. Our eyes met briefly before he turned away. He had lost everything: his reputation, his career, and soon his freedom. I had gained something far more valuable: vindication. 1 year after my dismissal from NovaMed, I stood at a podium in the University of Michigan's largest lecture hall, addressing a packed audience of students, faculty, and visiting researchers. The topic of my presentation: ethical guardianship, maintaining integrity in scientific research. The pressures you will face in your careers are real, I told them, my voice firm, resonating with the weight of experience. Funding constraints, publication demands, corporate interests, these are all pressures you will encounter. But the moment you compromise scientific integrity is the moment you stop being a scientist and become something else entirely. Something far less valuable to humanity. From my position at the university, I had developed a comprehensive training program that was now being adopted by research institutions across the country. My experience had been transformed into a cautionary tale with practical applications. After the lecture, as attendees filed out, I noticed a familiar face approaching: Thomas Reynolds, my former lab technician. "Dr. Voss," he greeted me with a broad smile. Professor now." I smiled, remembering the young man who had stood by me when others turned away. "How are things at NovaMed?" "Completely different," he replied. "The new leadership team has implemented all the protocols you designed. We're smaller now, but the work feels honest again." We chatted about the changes. NovaMed had survived, though diminished in size and scope. Meditech had paid hundreds of millions in fines and settlements. Malcolm and 2 Meditech executives had received federal prison sentences for fraud. As for Dr. Glass, she had avoided incarceration by cooperating fully with investigators, but her scientific career was effectively over. "I've been offered a research position here at the university," Thomas mentioned hesitantly. "I was hoping you might serve as my advisor." I smiled, remembering the young man who had stood by me when others turned away. "I'd be honored, Thomas." Later that evening, I received an email notification from a scientific journal. My article on research ethics reform had been accepted for publication. The system was changing, slowly but surely, and I had played my part.